Welcome to The Hidden Self. My name's Chris, and in the next series of videos we're going to actually look at the power of our mind, the power of our thoughts, and the influence our thoughts could have potentially to different objects, or indeed the physical health of our body. Now, I actually want to approach this not from a sort of mumbo jumbo woo woo kind of situation. I actually want to come at this from more of a scientific point of view. Now, if you're like me, when I was growing up, I was fascinated with some of these sort of movies about telepathy and people sort of taking over people's minds just through their own thoughts, or in the fact that you could move an object, and I'd be looking at an object for sort of hours at a time trying to will it to move. I remember the first time I saw Empire Strikes Back and Yoda in the swamp, and his ability to kind of connect with the Force and lift that spaceship out of the swamp. Well, this series of video is actually to question whether or not that's possible. And to some extent it is. Now, for some of you that might be too much, but why don't we just start with a baseline? Because the power of our thoughts actually have the power to either kill us or heal us. Now, let's start with the phenomena of placebo and nocebo, because these are two scientific realities in which our mind, the power of our thoughts, actually do have the capabilities to actually end our life or to heal us from a disease or an illness like cancer. For those who don't know, placebo is where, let's say in a pharmaceutical situation, that I might have 50 people that are suffering from a cancer, a rare cancer, and that there's a new drug that they want to trial. Now, 25 people take the actual trial drug and 25 people take a sugar pill. Now, both groups think they're actually trialing the drug. And the thing is that in both parties, both groups of people, there are a certain percentage that actually respond positively and actually cure themselves of cancer. But how can that be the case? Because there's one group that actually hasn't gone near the drug. They're just taking sugar pills. But it's their belief that they're taking a drug that actually cures them. And we don't know why. Now, with nocebo, there have been trials where people might have been suffering from a peanut allergy, and they might be looking at what triggers that. And in a situation where somebody who actually has a sugar pill but disguised as a peanut will actually trigger that allergy. They will actually believe that they're taking a peanut and they will actually trigger that allergy. Now, these are kind of two baselines that I want to start from. Because believe it or not, there are stories where people have actually thought themselves to death. And we'll explore that phenomena later on in a couple of other videos. So let's look at this slightly differently. What's happening? I've taken a peanut, but it's not a peanut that triggers an allergy. I'm taking a drug, but it's not a drug and it's curing cancer. So in both cases, my internal reality, the energy of my thoughts, is actually controlling and affecting my external self. It's actually creating enough energy within my thoughts to hold an instruction that once it exchanges into my physical cell, it triggers a reaction. And it triggers a reaction based on the instruction, i.e., fire up, trigger off the allergy, or fire up, trigger a response to this new drug that's going to cure X, Y, and Z within myself. So the direction of our life, or the direction of this phenomena, is coming internally to external. The thing that I'm taking externally isn't actually the thing that I think it is. So everything's coming from internal. Now, there are other directions. There are things that we look at of the in external world, we might be looking at a certain partner, a certain job, a certain car, a house, or whatever the material thing is. And what happens is that external thing actually controls how we behave. Drug addiction, food addiction, any type of addiction, it's the external world that controls our behaviour. And it actually hijacks our internal system and it forces us to behave in a certain way. Now, I'm going to use a fairly provocative example. I'm going to use the chemical reaction about having an orgasm. And all that's really happening is that we might have a thought that excites us in a way that we want to have an exchange with somebody or with ourselves, and we start touching ourselves in a way that stimulates our thinking, and all of a sudden I'm now narrowing my thoughts on one particular thing. Now if I start thinking about invoices or bills I haven't paid, I collapse my internal reality. I actually collapse the intensity of my thinking, and I collapse my physical experience. So what happens is that as I'm actually going through the motions of trying to reach an orgasm, right, my physical self hijacks my internal reality, and it basically says focus, 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 and it gets narrower and narrower and narrower, and it's intensifying that thinking, those thoughts that I have, to a point where I have a physical orgasm. I am actually getting to a point where my biological self triggers dopamine into my reward system, and it releases this enormous amount of pleasure. But there's an exchange, there's a relationship between how it's actually driving my internal reality and stimulation in certain physical parts of my body to bring these two together, to intensify the experience so I get a physical reaction. And that dopamine reward system is actually responsible for all addictions, and all addiction is based on that. All addiction is based on an external thing that we drive to fill ourselves with desire or with pleasure, but once we actually trigger that we want that, we have very little control to think of anything that isn't going to give us that pleasure. Somebody who's addicted to gambling, all they're thinking about is their next win. Somebody who's addicted to heroin is thinking about the next hit. Somebody who's addicted to food, they're just thinking about starting and enjoying the food that they have, because it triggers a dopamine hit that we find really enjoyable. But what's controlling us is our external self. And so these kind of polar opposites, these things that are at conflict within us, have very real bearings about the quality of life that we live. So if I actually break that down a little bit further, I'm now dealing with four fundamentally different elements. I am dealing with an external reality to try and fulfill my internal self. With placebo, it's the opposite. I've got an internal reality that is affecting my external self. And it's how we actually see the differences that will actually drive the direction of our life. Am I going to be living from an external reference point inward? Am I going to be controlled by my vices or my external reality? Because that will dictate and that will hijack and control my internal self. And that's why many people with addiction have an impoverished self-image and an exceptionally painful sense of self, because they've never decided, they've never been able to see the difference or break the cycle, break the habit of that addiction. And yet the people who are most fulfilled in this life are the people who can recognise and appreciate what they have by the kind of thought. So it's their internal world that is actually, that has this abundance of wealth that then drives their external self-image and their external sense of reality, their external experiences. And in the next couple of videos, we're going to really drill down on this phenomena about how we can actually take more control about our internal self, our internal reference, our internal reality to drive a much richer and fulfilling life.